Here. I pulled up actually off of marvel.com information here. So we are going to be talking about Spider-Ham #1. This was actually published towards the tail end of 2019 in December. It was written by Zeb Wells, penciled by Will Robson. The cover artist here is Wendell Dollett. It says, "Apocalypse now, not a dream, not a hoax, not an imaginary tale. Spider-Man finally has his own series again. Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham, finds himself jumping through time, side by side with Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. Zeb Wells and Will Robson bring you the Ham and Man story you've been waiting for." So I did read this digitally, and then Eric, I think you actually read it as a print copy, correct?
Got it right here. Yep. I am a
Very
physical
cool.
copy guy. Very proud physical copy guy.
I read it digitally. It's just easier for me to pick it up that way. This is the Arthur Adams cover, which is always fun to see Arthur Adams' take on things.
Oh, that's a nice cover.
Yeah, it's fun. I've been a fan of Spider-Ham since I remember seeing it way back in the day. Spider-Ham was one of those comics that was constantly being passed around, like in school when I was younger. Everyone just loved it and enjoyed it. I did a little bit of additional research into Spider-Ham. I didn't realize this, but there's actually an interesting G.I. Joe connection to Spider-Ham. Do you know what the connection is?
To G.I. Joe and Spider-Ham? I'm guessing
Yeah.
an artist that worked on both of them or something like that. Is my guess wrong?
Yeah, unfortunately, well, no, not exactly. Actually, Larry Hama is credited as one of the co-creators of Spider-Ham, which I thought was really interesting. I didn't realize that he was it's one of those things when you grow up reading certain comics, sometimes you pay attention to the credits and then other times you don't. And I'd never really paid a lot of attention to the credits for Spider-Ham. I just enjoyed reading them.
Well, one thing I did notice, it's kind of funny that you bring that up. And by the way, Mike mentions that he loves the Art Adams work on the connecting cover. But one thing I thought was interesting is, in the credits, they don't credit a creator of Spider-Ham. I got the credits right here and everything like that. You can see it. They credit Stan Lee and Steve Ditko as creators of Spider-Man, but there is no credit for a creator of Spider-Ham in the book.
I think that all goes back to
I'm glad you just brought up what you were just talking about, because in the book there's no credit.
Yeah. It's one of those things you always like to talk about, where these things, come from, where they originate. I just didn't realize that Larry Hama, which Mike quoted Larry Ham. I was surprised that that Larry Hama had a hand in Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham is one of those characters I've always thought would be fun to actually go back and actually collect the original series, like all of the original comics for.
Bobby says Simpsons did it too.
So very cool. All right, so tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions of this Spider-Ham #1 here?
Well, I liked it. I remember, if I recall correctly, my brother had a book. It wasn't a Spider-Ham book, but it was a book where they had like a short Spider-Ham story that was supposed to be like essentially like an ad almost to promote Spider-Ham. That's how I remember hearing about the character or seeing the character. And I always liked it because I like cartoony stuff. I've mentioned on this show before that my favorite comic book artists are on the extreme ends of art. It's Bruce Timm with the very cartoony and Alex Ross with the super photorealistic. I'm a man of extremes. And so I always like stuff that has to do with that kind of cartoony fun style. So I enjoy that. I have to say, it's kind of interesting. We were talking about this off the air, but the first 2 pages of this book is actually in the classic original style of Spider-Ham, which is different than the art in the interior book. Like, this is what Spider-Ham looks like inside the book. And it's a very different style than also what the sketch that you were showing earlier. And I really do like the old style. You know what I mean? I do like it better. I like the old style better, but I do appreciate the new style as well. And I also get the fact that it's because they want to tie it into the Spider-Verse, which is why we have this book in the first place. Let's be real. The reason we have this book is because Spider-Ham was kind of a breakout star of the Spider-Verse. My kids loved him. I loved him. A lot of people loved him. I will say, I always kind of go after the comic book industry on kind of bonehead business decisions. This book should have been out like 6-8 months ago. You know what I mean? When Spider-Verse was really, of course, but they didn't know, right? I guess they didn't realize, and again, that's also bad business, right? They didn't understand who the big stars would be, right? They didn't understand. So, it's one of those things where I feel like that's a missed opportunity, because clearly that's why we're getting the book in the first place. It's because of the success of the Spider-Verse movie, and because Spider-Ham was so popular and so well received by fans. So I'm glad he got a book. I'll say that. I'm glad he got a book. So far, I'm enjoying it. I like it. Like I said, I do kind of prefer the original Spider-Ham art style as opposed to the new style, but I understand the new style because it looks more like the Spider-Verse movie. So I'm willing to grant that. I can concede that. I get it. I'm not upset about it. It's just a personal preference.
Right. I honestly, I prefer the original style too, but I did enjoy this story, and I'm not sure, but I think that original art might have actually been by Fred Hembeck. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. If I remember correctly, I think he was the original artist who actually did that opening sequence.
Oh, okay.
He did a lot of that funny Marvel stuff back in the day. It's interesting because Chris Giarrusso does a lot of that fun stuff now. But I think it was Fred Hembeck. Let me.
I see Steve Mueller, Joe. Was it? Is it Albello? Joe Albello, Pierre Fournier. That's who I see credited for those panels in the beginning in the original art style.
Then apparently I was incorrect, but it was very reminiscent of his style. It's going to pull up. Well, I don't want to bore everyone with this, but trying to see.
Those first two panels apparently are from Peter Porker, The Spectacular Spider-Ham number 15. That's what's credited in the book.
Yeah, and see, I think of this is part of the reason why I think. Let me get this loaded up right. I think this is why I think of because it's one of those things. I don't remember a lot of credits in the Spider-Ham books, but this image here I've loaded up. It's got the pencils there, Fred Hembeck. So that's kind of who I tend to think of. This is from issue 4. So, but yeah, no. Anyhow, enough about that. Waxing poetic about the past. No. So let's talk about our impressions. Actually, the origin is a fun thing that I think could be entertaining to recap just real quickly. For those people that are not familiar, Spider-Ham's origin is kind of interesting because he is actually a spider that's actually bitten by essentially the Spider-Ham version of Aunt May. She's actually creating some sort of next generation electric hair dryer. It's just weird. It's like a mad scientist.
It's a nuclear powered hair dryer.
Yeah,
it's a nuclear powered hair dryer. That's what she's inventing.
She's going to revolutionize the world with it. She sits in it. She gets zapped by it, and it's almost like a zombie. She immediately goes over and actually bites the spider, and the spider actually turns into a pig. She's like a pig or a ham type character, so he turns into a pig type character. And it's interesting too how they kind of reflect that, because he just kind of stays with her as if he's like, because it's weird because you think of Aunt May and Peter Parker and they're related, but he's kind of like a freeloader, that she wants out of the house. So it's interesting because he's a bug that mutated into a pig as opposed to a pig that was bitten by us. It's weird that it's a complete flip of the whole Spider-Man origin in a sense. But he invents his web shooters. Even though he originally was a spider, he actually invent web shooters because he actually loses an ability.
You're right. He loses the ability to. Yeah, exactly.
He actually loses some powers. So I thought that was kind of interesting. He has to kind of compensate because now that he's a pig, he's lost some abilities. But it's the original origin. I just remember how much I love the classic series. And then as we get into the actual, I guess the biggest surprise for me actually reading this book, because I did enjoy it. It's very well drawn. I like the colors. It very much follows the look and style of the Spider-Verse. So if you like that version of the character, it's very much in that vein. But I did think it was interesting that they have been promoting and selling this book primarily as Spider-Ham's teaming up with Peter Parker. It's Spider-Ham and Spider-Man teaming up, right? So I was expecting them to basically run into each other sooner, because basically the whole issue does focus on Spider-Ham, which is good, but we don't actually introduce any elements of the traditional Spider-Man until we get almost basically to the end of the book. So I was kind of surprised at that. So were you surprised at that too, or is it just me?
No, I wasn't. I was surprised that he actually is. I didn't know the premise of the story. Okay, so I bought this book on the cover alone, and the fact that I liked Spider-Ham in the Spider-Verse movie. That's why I bought this. And actually, a funny thing, I think I mentioned this to you also. I didn't go into the comic book shop to buy this. I went into the comic book shop to buy Picard #3, and they were out. And when I go to a comic book shop, I don't like to just leave without anything, even if I came for something else. I'm like, you know what? I don't go to comic book shop all the time. I'm in one right now. I'm going to look and see if there's anything that appeals to me. And that's why I got this, because the cover appealed to me, and because I really enjoyed Spider-Ham in the Spider-Verse movie. So that's why I got it. So I didn't know. Like, you can see on the cover, but I didn't really pay attention. You can see on the cover that obviously we have the more traditional version of Spider-Man here. But I thought it was just a funny cover. I didn't know that was what the story was. I thought that we were just going to be doing some adventures with Spider-Ham in his universe, which is how this book starts out. So in terms of my expectations, I think the thing that I was most surprised about actually was the premise of what this book is. But also what I liked and was pleasantly surprised with was they showed so many of the other animal people versions of the other superheroes. And I really liked that. I thought that was really neat, because I was thinking about that, because when I was doing some research about Spider-Ham after the Spider-Verse movie, I didn't realize there were so many other characters that were, made into animals and all that kind of stuff and parodied in the book. And you get like all the major ones are in this one. So in terms of like, if you're interested in that and all these different sort of animal people versions of Captain America, of Hawkeye, of, Mr. Fantastic. I mean, the list goes on, like big characters. Iron Man. You get to see the versions of them in his universe, in this animal person universe. You get to see all of them pretty much in this book, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I do remember them doing a lot of that, because they did versions of all the classic Spider-Man villains, and they did a lot of the important Marvel characters in the original. I do want to apologize, because we are experiencing some slowdowns here and there. That everyone's probably seeing in the live stream. We have no control over that. That's almighty interweb doing what it does. But I think my personal favorite, the one that I didn't remember from a kid, is they showed us the sub-marsupial. I'm a big Namor the Submariner fan. I'm like actually a big Bill Everett fan just in general. Of course, Bill Everett created the Submariner, going actually back to the golden age of comics. And of course, many, many years later in the 60s, with Stan Lee, co-created Daredevil. But I just particularly enjoyed the submarsupial. They referenced Doctor Doom. I thought that was in it. It was a mouse. I thought that was
Right.
kind of oddly poetic. I don't remember if he was actually a mouse in the original Spider-Ham comic or not. I don't remember. But if he was, that was oddly prophetic when you consider the connections between Iron Man and Walt Disney. When you look at the Iron Man films, because they kind of portray Iron Man's father as sort of being a Walt Disney-like character or personality.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's this nice page in the book where they just kind of go through a bunch of the different characters and everything like that I thought was really, really cool, because they give you all the silly names, like the Black Cult, like you said, the Slug Marsupial, Mooster Fantastic,
Right.
Yeah, and then Proctor Strange, right? Proctor Strange.
Yeah, he's a crocodile. Alligator. Yeah,
I like that stuff. I thought it's fun. It's silly. So,
yeah, this was a very entertaining book, and I'll probably be checking out the rest of the series just to follow along with it and see how it goes. Might be fun actually if we finish the series up when it ends, but maybe we might revisit this and kind of talk about the rest of the issues, the storyline as a whole, because it does end with the introduction of the Spider-Man, the traditional Peter Parker Spider-Man elements.
right.
So I quite enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun. For people that like Spider-Ham or people who actually like the Spider-Verse movie, I think this is definitely worth visiting and checking out, either in digital or print form. And I'm seriously considering, I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to try and see if I can actually collect a lot of those old Spider-Ham comics. I have a feeling that first issue is going to cost me a lot more than it would have if I'd done it a few years ago.
Last time I looked into it, they'd gone up in price. But that was like right after the movie came out. So
right. So maybe they've equalized out by now. There's certain characters I've always meant to go back and collect a lot of the early important issues, like Moon Knight. I wanted to do Iron Fist for a long time, but some of those now, because of the Netflix shows and the Marvel films of development, a lot of those have now eclipsed my my price range. But I don't know. I might try and run down these Spider-Ham books just for fun. We'll see.
it would be nice because both Marvel and DC have been reprinting a lot of these classic books, and like I know with DC, they're like a buck. I recently picked up the first appearance of Harley Quinn in comic books, which was actually, ironically, it was in the adaptation of the Batman animated series. So the Batman animated series had its own comic book. That was the first appearance of Harley Quinn in comics. That book is like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars now, because it's considered the first appearance of Harley Quinn in comics. But they reprinted it, and I bought it from my daughter the other day, and it was only $1 for the reprint. So it'd be nice if they did something like that with Spider-Ham, if they had some of the older issues and they brought them back with these reprints, because Marvel does this as well, and that we could see them. Like I know they have like the first appearance of the Hulk I saw at one of the stores I was at. I think the first appearance of Wolverine. A lot of those, they're reprinting them. And I think that's very cool. And they're usually cheaper, too, than a standard comic because all the art's already done. They just have to pay whatever residuals or whatever, you know what I mean? So they're generally, the book itself is cheaper. Like I said, the DC one for Harley Quinn was $1.
Right.
And that's a brand new comic book, but it's a reprint. So it'd be nice if they did that with Spider-Ham. I would really appreciate that.
Well, and they do have a trade collection actually for the first, I know they have at least one volume of Spider-Ham, the original series, in a collected volume. So even if you can't actually run down the single issues, you can always go back and actually, get the first the volume one of a trade paperback, collecting at least part of the original Spider-Ham series. And just a reminder here to everyone that's participating in our chat. Everyone that's participating in our chat, you have the opportunity to be entered in, well, not an opportunity, you will be entered into a drawing actually to possibly win this Spider-Ham sketch that I did. Did this actually this morning. So thank you to everyone who's participating in the chat. If you're watching the show right now or you're just seeing it right now, please, chime in. Let us know your thoughts on Spider-Ham or our next topic here. Please join the conversation, and you'll be entered into a drawing to win this sketch of Spider-Ham.
Very, very cool.
Awesome.
I did want to mention with the Spider-Ham series, the current one, it's rated teen. I'm not really sure why. I don't know. I feel more and more like teen and PG-13 is like something that companies are doing, perhaps because of COPPA, perhaps to be more trendy and cool, because I don't see why it's rated teen, and I don't see why it would be. To me, this is the type of book that should be accessible to everybody. I had my kids read it. They all loved it. But I just want to point that out, that it is rated teen. I don't really know why. I don't know if you have any insight into that, but I have a feeling like the teen rating has now become like a badge of courage or something like that. Like it's almost like its own little brand now. That, like I said, I don't know if that's because of COPPA. It's something that I'm noticing as I'm reading books and even going to movies. Everything is PG-13, and you're sitting there like, well, why is that PG-13? You know what I mean? But it is what it is. I just thought I would point that out.
You never know. It might have something to do with other issues in the series that we haven't seen yet. Maybe that's why it has that rating. Maybe there's something that happens in a future issue that requires that it be at that. But at the same point, too, there are certain. It's interesting because a few years ago, some of the better of the all ages books, like you mentioned, Harley Quinn appearing in the Batman animated comic that DC was publishing. Some of those Johnny DC titles were some of the best books that DC was publishing back then, and those were all considered all ages books. So,
yeah. I think I'm contributing to the delinquency of a minor. For shame, for shame.
Mike is doing Frederick Wortham proud. We're never going to get past to that. Yeah, Lord. It's so interesting because, like, in certain countries where comics didn't have the stigma that the Wortham trials kind of put on comics with the publication of his book, The Seduction of the Innocent, that albatross still with certain people, you know what I mean, it just hangs around comics in general. I know Mike's playing it for a laugh, but I can't help but think about how that in a sense affected the industry as a whole. When you look at Japan specifically, with how manga and anime are so pervasive throughout their culture. And I don't mean pervasive in a bad way. I mean just that it's everywhere, that it's a part of their cultural dialogue. Some people complain about how much of this content that we have right now between TVs and movies and streaming and the comics and the graphic novels and everything. And some people feel like that it's beneath us as a society or a culture to celebrate and be so wrapped up in this stuff. But then I go, well, look at it this way. Had the Wortham trials not done the damage that it did, back in the day and caused, the damage it did to the industry, it would maybe be a little bit more integrated, and not seem like so much all at once. Because this is still some of the more fantastical, fun entertainment that all of us can enjoy. This is our fun escapism. So for a lot of us anyway.
And the funny thing is, there's also, I think, a total unintended consequence there that I see with my experience with the comic book industry and having gone to San Diego Comic-Con for years and being around all the industry people and hearing what people were saying. The funny thing I think that also happened was there was sort of a rebellion against the Comics Code Authority. And a lot of artists, they didn't want to be doing children's books. And there was like this pushback among creative types where they wanted to be taken seriously. And what they've done is completely alienated a huge part of the fan base, which was the kids. I was a kid and I loved comics, and I collected comics as a kid far more than I collect them now. I was really into it, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like the industry chased the kids away. And it's like, you're killing the generation. It's all going to be guys like my age and stuff like that. I'm trying to get my kids into comics, and my kids do like comics. But you know what? It's a hard sell, and especially if you're being superficial. If you don't know a lot about comics, like say that you didn't grow up on comics, you're a mom or dad, didn't grow up on comics, but you know about Spider-Verse, and you're like, oh, Spider-Ham. You want to pick it up for your kid, and it says teen on it, and you say, well, I guess I'll pass. You know what I mean? So things like that I think there's unintended consequences also that happened from all of that, because I think there was a legitimate rebellion against the Comics Code Authority and this idea that, we don't want to be that. We want to do our own thing. We want to do cool stuff. We want to be like Spawn and be, outrageous and daring and gross and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't do well for little kids. And little kids, that's who made this industry. I mean, that's who made the comic book industry, was little kids. So I just thought I'd mention that.
No, yeah, and one item we didn't cover in pop culture news, which is adjacently related to a lot of what you're bringing up right now, is all the stuff that happened with the Harley Quinn film. You have. I still don't understand why they titled it, Birds of Prey, because it has no connection to Birds of Prey, really, that those of us that read the comics, and it adds again to this weird mire and confusion, for some really great source material. And sometimes it feels like we're in such a rush to take these, well, not us. Let me take that a step back. The industry is in such a rush sometimes to take these concepts and push them out that sometimes they're doing a lot of damage. And I feel like the Harley Quinn film, languishing at the box office and this weird nonsense where they're trying to retitle the film because they realize that no one understands what Birds of Prey is, but everyone knows who Harley Quinn is. Why they didn't call the film Harley Quinn in the first place, I have no idea. It makes no sense to me because it sure as hell ain't Birds of Prey. The first DC film I have not seen opening weekend in the movie theater. The first one since going back to 1978, 1977 was Superman the movie. I have seen every single DC Comics movie opening weekend in the theater. My mom used to take me as a kid because she knew how much I loved all this stuff. All of the Superman films, including Superman 4, all of them. I saw Steel. All of them in the movie theater. The first one I haven't seen was this Birds of Prey mess. I couldn't. And I've heard some people like it, but
I did want to acknowledge Bobby's comment. He says, I rarely see kids in the shop these days. And he adds, that's sad, which I agree with him. It is sad. I usually see them because when I go to a comic book shop, I usually take my kids with me. But I don't see a whole lot of other kids. But the funny thing is with the Birds of Prey debacle, which we did talk about, including it in the show, I had an article ready for that as far as the renaming and all that stuff, but I excised it for time. But at least I guess we could kind of cover it. Because I did have an article for that about the renaming and the bad branding, and of course, it's like now they're going to second guess everything because it is a huge bomb, and they're going to try to blame everybody and they're going to blame everything. But the marketing seems obvious. You're right. It's like Harley Quinn's the most popular character. She was the only one that had been previously established in another film. The list goes on and on and on. But I did have an article for that, but I axed it for time. So.
Like I said, it's not directly related, but it's kind of adjacently related to what you were talking about the difference between, how content is being marketed and put together and who it's being sold to. Mm-hmm. Harley Quinn, essentially was an all ages character that they're selling to an older audience, and they've been doing it for a while. DC repackaged everything in the New 52 to try and appeal to a new audience. But in the process of some of this stuff is alienating the whole audience, and it's not playing well with a lot of people. And I think you see that in what happened with the film, and then you get into, it's like, well, what percentage of that is just marketing, and what percentage of that is just this packaged version of the character isn't working.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you 100% because I'm an old school Harley Quinn fan. I like the where it came from, the animated version and that kind of thing. And that's not what I'm seeing in the live action version. I hated Suicide Squad. So that's a whole other topic. I mean, I hated that movie. So I have no interest in Birds of Prey because I hated that movie. I will concede that Harley Quinn was the coolest, best thing in that movie, but I still hated it. So I have no interest in Birds of Prey.
I enjoyed Suicide Squad in the In the Studio retrospective episode. We actually gave Suicide Squad a favorable review, Jan, Mark, and myself. And I enjoyed the film. I had a lot of fun with it. I just found what they did with this spinoff sequel to just be a bit baffling. You have essentially a version of Batgirl who is Batgirl. You have a version of Question who isn't Question. You know what I mean? And then they're saying it's Birds of Prey, but I haven't seen the film, so I apologize for those who've seen it if I seem to be speaking out of turn. But Oracle is such an important part of Birds of Prey. To me, it's more of a female James Bond, than what to me looks more like a Gotham City Sirens kind of approach. Which I think that would have been a better subtitle, Harley Quinn, Gotham City Sirens. But that's just me. So I don't want to dump on the film too much because I haven't seen it. But it's worth noting, in this discussion about all ages material and how things are packaged today. Like I said, not directly related but adjacent. The weird debacle that went on with the Harley Quinn film, where it's a packaging marketing mistake, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.